Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webcast, Point of Work Insights, the new frontier for accelerating productivity and sustaining performance, sponsored by Pandexio. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. You will receive an email from hr.com within 2 business days. It will include the certification credit information. You can also log into hr.com and go to your View My Credits page, where you can see the credits that you have received. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on Q&A in your webinar controls and type them in. Also, a new tab will open in your browser with the webcast survey. Please make sure to complete it as soon as the webcast has ended. Today, Lacey Lowe, Executive VP Marketing at Pandexio, will have a discussion interview style with 3 thought leaders and entrepreneurs: Bob Dana, Executive Chairman at Pandexio, Dave Miller, Executive Consultant at Pandexio, and Gary Wise, Performance Strategist at Human Performance Outfitters, on creating and sharing actionable insights in the flow of work, a breakthrough approach for accelerating productivity in today's workforces and workplaces. Over to Lacey to get us started.
Thank you, Kathy, so much. Just to cover off on the webcast logistics first, following the conversation today, we'll provide each of you with a copy of our slides, the link for playback of our discussion, and our email addresses if you wish to talk with one of us one-to-one about how best to implement at your organization what we share today as key practices for insight sharing in the flow of work. Bob.
Terrific. Thank you, Lacey. First, want to start off with a little bit more information.
You can advance the slide, Gary.
A little bit more information about our role as HR professionals as we focus on the changing workforce and the changing workplace. So we need to be thinking over the next couple of years about that workforce, when everything that can be turned over to robotics and automation will be turned over. Everything that can be transitioned from human intervention to self-service will be. And then everything that can be turned over or supplemented by AI and cognitive technologies have occurred. So at that point, we have the preponderance of workers as part of your organization, as part of your workforce, being knowledge workers. And you can see on the left-hand side, that's already well in place, but it will continue to accelerate over time. In addition, on the right-hand side, we see a real dilemma. And the dilemma is that we are hitting a productivity plateau. You can see that productivity has been plotted over the many years, but over the last several years, both in Europe and the United States, we've seen a significant decrease in productivity, even though we have an increase in knowledge workers and an increase in collaboration technologies, various other technologies to support those knowledge workers, with a hope of actually focusing on the productivity increases. We go to the next slide. In addition, what we're seeing is that you as HR professionals are now being asked by senior executives to address a number of crucial skills that will have a direct impact on the company's outcomes, their business outcomes, their productivity. And so you can see that the executives are talking about a need for crucial skills in the future that include innovation, creative thinking, problem solving, decision making, risk management. And in fact, things are getting worse in time. On the right-hand side at the bottom, the rapid information growth that's going on is becoming overwhelming. Obviously, the cognitive systems and automation are all driving stress in the organization to move towards more knowledge workers taking over that higher level thinking. And the speed of change and disruption is only increasing. And you can't go to any business journal, any business publication or the World Economic Forum and not hear these things. So this is in fact driving what you as HR professionals have to think about in terms of the future workforce and workplace. The next slide actually articulates this from Josh Bersin. just published in January. He articulates the evolution that we have been going through and a bit of the path forward for HR's continuing journey. So we've gone through, all of us, automation, integration, engagement, the waves of both changes in organizational structuring, resourcing, process, and technology. And now we're arriving at this phase, all driven by those trends that we just discussed, that are focused now on the right-hand side, where we as HR professionals have to be thinking about productivity improvements, performance, the teams and team dynamics, work management, all with the focus, as the executives are asking us to do, all with the focus on optimizing productivity through alignment and various other means to make sure that the teams are networked and leveraging to the greatest degree possible all of the available wisdom and information in the organization to address the needs of that critical thinking and decision making we just discussed. The next slide actually is reinforcing of this because in fact, Josh Bersin has gone through and said, you know, for us as HR professionals, it's all about improving the employee experience, redesigning the workplace to improve productivity. So the focus is all going to be on that. Danny Johnson over at Red Thread Research, similar things, but with us kind of focused on increasing engagement. We also see this coming out of PwC, thinking about what the organizations need to do to start to deploy technologies and rethinking technologies to drive the impact that we're going to have. Mark Smith over at Ventana Research, similar, but all now starting to think about all of this in the flow of work. So in the flow of work, driving the impact of anything we're doing from a process, a resourcing, and a technology standpoint. And then obviously, you know, Gartner is certainly reiterating this, focused on what we just talked about, decision-making, intelligence, and general purpose learning. And then ultimately, Rob Cross, same thing. Knowledge workers and collaboration technologies have got to address a lot of the issues. And so we are at a new place in time where a number of us may not have actually wrapped our heads or arms around the real needs that they're all showing up on our plate right now.
Great, thanks, Bob, for getting us introduced to some of the insights and perspectives around the decline in productivity recently. Some of these, the words that are really popping out at me from these analysts are critical in terms of trends. Interestingly enough, I just read an article on LinkedIn that, you know, people are tired of listening to trends. And so that causes me to ask a question of you, Dave. Trends really matter when they manifest themselves in the context of work, right? And we're all faced with having to do something about them or because of them. So in reality, in the practical context of our workforces and workplaces today, and as you think about these trends, what really matters to those people that are partaking in our conversation today? Why do they care about these trends as it relates to their workplaces and workforces?
Sure, thanks, Lacey. Because this certainly, the slide shows our world today. This is where we live. But now what we always think about, or I do, is say, okay, so what? Well, you know, to me, productivity can also be thought of as producing the outcomes that are required by our business organization. Now, as Bob's gone over and Lacey just reiterated, we've been seeing these trends for the last 4 or 5 years. Our employees, our staff are inundated with massive amounts of input, content that has to be consumed, then it's evaluated, then it's analyzed, and then it's used to get work done. But, or to put it a different way, to produce the outcomes required by their jobs. This is the form of social and business-related media, such as Slack and Yammer and MS Teams and email and texts and LinkedIn and a whole host of content management systems that we usually refer to using links or pointing people to them. Some organizations are making more progress than others by reducing distractions. This usually, though, on a downside, comes by eliminating some or all of the sources of this distraction. But that has a flip side of the coin that has the potential and reality of stifling communication and exchange of information that really is vital to our world of real-time integrated business and operations, the world we live in. So for productivity must be enhanced to provide a good, solid, competitive viability and advantage, not by stifling these interactions, but by enabling meaningful collaboration in a way that's modern, that takes advantage of the way people are collaborating today, inefficient as it might be. That is generating and consuming data, information, and knowledge, and then using all of that wisely to achieve those goals and objectives. So people today, the workforce today wants to share what they know through study and, most critically, practical experience. It's happening all around us in the non-business world. And now in our organizations, we need to see how that can be applied to action. It's up to us, I think, the HR leaders, and especially those of us in talent development and utilization, to provide the assistance, that facilitation that's going to enable people to perform at their best.
Great, thanks, Dave. And so it's clear from Bob's sort of context setting and what you've shared here that workforce productivity, or I guess really the decline thereof, is an issue for many of our employees, our teams, our workforces at large. When I took a look at the participant list for today's session, we're joined by many leaders, several business leaders, a lot more HR leaders. And so it causes me to think about, what specifically can HR leaders do to help resolve these three kind of workforce realities or distractions, and therefore help around improving the productivity challenge?
Thanks, Lacey, you bet. And the slide illustrates the points that I'm going to make now, and that's that as HR leaders, we have now, or we must have, a seat at the table. Because wearing our talent management and development hat as part of our HR leadership, we can lead the way by ensuring our workforces are provided with the tools they need to operate in that real-time integrated world I mentioned. We HR leaders would do this in complete partnership with our C-suite and business owners. So when employees are provided the means to communicate and collaborate quickly and in easily digestible pieces that are used, and I will say there's a word that's overused a bit, but a meaningful one, synergy can occur. It's not just a byword of the past. It's something we really need to do and can, so that 1 + 1 not only equals 3, but more accurately, 1 + many equals the entire organization or the applicable parts of it. So the key is to generate insights, as shown in our graphic, that are written by exceptional employees, those that are unconsciously best at what they do, and they then produce curated insights that don't disappear into the ether over time, and usually a very short time, or are lost when people leave for other opportunities by whatever attrition occurs. So these insights, when curated, something we can do now digitally, provide the way for brain share to occur. A term used today in the digital world is also crowdsource or crowd share, which is very descriptive of what is occurring in our social lives and can now occur, as I've mentioned a little bit before, in our business and operational lives. One huge difference is that in our business lives, we can monitor and provide quality assurance to the collaboration, measure its effect in the workplace as part of the workflow, those day in, day out activities, as people consume the insights at their point of work, and reward employees who are best at participating in these activities. Gary's going to be diving into a lot more deal about this next.
Great, thanks, Dave. And wow, being in an HR leader role myself over the last 20 some years, Just listening to everything that I would have to do as an HR leader on this slide alone is frankly overwhelming. And it causes me to say, well, where do I start? You know, do I start worrying about this new insight-driven organization? Do I worry about, you know, creating a networked workforce across all functions? How do I amplify critical thinking in my workforce? Yes, I have to do all of it, but with this growing set of responsibilities, along with all the other work I need to get done as an HR leader, where do I start in terms of impacting this decline in productivity? So Gary, I turn to you. Can you help me sort what Dave shared with us as critical responsibilities for HR leaders and where I might start focusing some attention to have some impact on this productivity decline?
Thank you, Lacey. I'd be happy to. Bob actually opened this webinar with a concept that revealed research that we have reached a productivity plateau. There was also a slide that I recall that showed research that gave us a point of perspective that thinking critically is in short supply. I think a critical question we need to consider simply, if we're going to consider this a new paradigm or possibly an evolved paradigm and develop this new learning performance mindset, is where does productivity take place? It doesn't happen during training, but during performance at the point of work, where our knowledge workers need rapid access to insights, as David mentioned, to think critically, and support essential to performing in the workflow. Moving our solutions closer to, if not embedded into the workflow, are absolutely critical, and the primary motivation for this concept of a new paradigm. At conferences where I'm blessed to speak on numerous occasions, there's this question that I'd like you to consider. How many of you today have a dynamic learning performance ecosystem in place? Go ahead and plug in your responses, and we'll talk through some of these results here as you complete your postings.
Great, thanks, Gary. I think Kathy's opening the poll for us now. We're just waiting for some participants to cast their vote. So what's this question? How many of you have dynamic learning performance ecosystems in place today? Yes, no, not sure. This sounds like jargon. Okay, we've got lots of folks weighing in. Looks like we might have it looks like we've got most folks in. Gary, can you see the results? If not, I can read them for you.
Yes, I can, and it looks like we have a pretty good dispersion, unlike what I see at the conferences where I speak. It's interesting because the correct answer to this is yes. Everyone on this call has a dynamic learning performance ecosystem in place today. The question that really matters is, how optimized is it? And it's not how do we optimize training, as in more, better, faster, but how do we optimize workforce performance at the point of work? And I'll go into the how here in just a few minutes. Yes, this can sound like jargon, so there's really no answers that are incorrect here, but this is the whole concept of developing a new performance, a new learning performance, if you will, mindset.
Great. So Gary, I'm actually pleased to see that you know, not too many thought it was just jargon. So it seems then by the poll results that it must be something tangible that HR leaders can do something with, can take action on to improve productivity. Is that true?
Absolutely, and I think to further clarify and answer your question, I'd like to take a brief look at some context here about this whole concept of ecosystem, to dispel the fact that it may be considered jargon and the misunderstanding of the fact that yes, you really do have one, and that's the impetus behind the need to adopt this new paradigm and to create a new mindset. The pie chart you see on this screen is a representative of an ecosystem in the context of a 2,000-hour work year. The first component to the ecosystem is what I've called point of entry. This is where people take formal learning or training. Statistica.com did a study in 2017 of over 600 organizations that said on the average, a worker, a knowledge worker, spends 46 hours plus or minus in formal training during the course of a year. Now, obviously, your mileage will vary depending on how your industry requires training. If it's healthcare, it may be higher. If it's fairly regulated, it could be higher, or in some cases, it may actually be lower. So keep in mind, this is an average. The technology that's used to support this is our long-standing technology platform known as the Learning Management System, and the new entrants to the market now, learning experience platforms, are stepping in to push the LMS a little bit out of the way as it introduces a more social, a more collaborative learning experience. But in all cases, it's still a platform that makes learning, formal learning, training, courses, e-learning, pick what you like. If it's formal, it comes from one of these two systems. The downside is the tangible evidence of impact, and we can only measure at level 1 and level 2. Level 1 being our end of course smile sheets. Love the course, love the content, love the instructor. The chicken tacos were great. And yes, I'd invite a colleague to take this course. But what it does not give us any indication of is actual performance, because no one has done anything yet. Level 2 evaluations can show that we transferred knowledge successfully because we've got final exam scores, or we can compare pre and post test, or people can demonstrate proficiency in some sort of job simulation or job emulation. The point is, all we can actually produce, that we can prove that we have produced, is potential. If we want something other than potential, which obviously we do, we have to go to the rest of the ecosystem to handle that. That typically is out of scope for most learning and development solutions. We're focused on training, this small piece of this ecosystem. The balance is the point of work. This is where people are actually in their respective workflows. They're confronting moments of need and depending upon recall of what they got during point of entry to resolve those problems. The technology is different and the content is different. The technology, as you see here, we're only going to talk about 2 today, but performance support or digital performance support, which is fully digital and cloud-based, and insight curation engines like Pandexio are also cloud-based. The kicker here is tangible evidence of impact is measured at level 3 and level 4. Actual visible performance changes and actual physical financial impact to the business, where we either create, lose, protect, compromise true business value. This is the significant motivation that we should have to take a look at developing this new mindset, is getting to the point of work where value is created. Lacey?
Yeah, terrific, Gary. This is actually really interesting, and I do appreciate your perspective. But hey, let's talk for a moment about how we approach design in the performance ecosystem. This sounds like an interesting concept. You've written a lot about something called intentional design. How does this differ from what we typically are familiar with, which is the traditional instructional design approach?
Sure, Bob. Again, if you take a look, keeping consistent with this ecosystem theme, the good news is no instructional designers will be harmed during this transition. The one thing that I think is important to understand is this ecosystem needs to be treated like a continuum, a learning performance continuum. And you see the polar ends of the continuum here on the screen now. Point of entry where we train, and point of work where we actually create value in the business. What's significant to this ecosystem is every ecosystem is made up of multiple microsystems. Finance and accounting is its own microsystem. HR and learning and development are their own microsystem. Sales and marketing is a microsystem. Logistics and distribution is a microsystem. Any arm of the business has unique workflows, they have unique role responsibilities, and they all have a point of work where value is generated. And they're unique and discrete when you compare them across responsibilities and all these different microsystems. What is significant with intentional design is where we start. We start at the point of work. We assess the point of work because our end objective here and the brass ring is to sustain workforce performance. And as I said earlier, this is not training content, and the technology that supplies this is not the LMS or the learning experience platform. This concept of just enough, just in time, just for me gives a really good picture of what these assets are. Just enough. If your hair is on fire, logging into the learning management system to take a refresher on a fire safety course is not a viable option. I need just in time. I need access within 2 clicks and 10 seconds. And just for me implies that it's role specific. This gives us the ability for this transition from point of entry to point of work to be seamless. The burden should not be on the knowledge worker's back to decide or to recall, where do I go to get the information I need right now? Frictionless means 2 clicks or 10 seconds. Especially if you're a customer service agent, you don't have time to take to time out and put somebody on hold while you go look for information. It needs to be available at your fingertips. And ubiquitous, given we're a mobile work environment, it needs to be to and from any device to get to any of the enterprise technologies that are available to us. That's at the core of what I have called intentional design. I am intentionally going to design assets that fit that mold of just enough, just in time, just for me, which support tactical and strategic moments of need at the point of work. Performance support, obviously, is tactical. What do I do now? What's my next step? Performance insights give me the ability to support speed to insight for critical thinking and informed decision making. What I want to accomplish with intentional design is to have my instructional designers take these assets that will be created for those moments of need and train the point of work during the point of entry. Obviously, our end game at point of entry is to effectively transfer knowledge and skills. That's training. We've all heard of blended learning. This gives blended learning a whole new face because now I am blending point of work into point of entry. I can decrease the amount of time spent during training by using performance support assets and performance insight assets using this very technology in scenario-based exercises, which obviously are experiential. But the whole idea here is I'm now creating learning performance solutions, not just learning solutions.
Gary, thanks so much for describing sort of the differences and the synergies between what likely we all know about instructional design and ISD practices, and this new concept of intentional design that's supported also by some enablers that are new in the technology space. It's refreshing to see that we're not just throwing one baby out in the bathwater for another, but they're actually coming together to, again, impact this productivity equation. As I think, again, of myself as an HR leader and trying to make some changes within my own area of expertise around, design, intentional and instructional, what might you see or what might have you experienced with your clients as being the greatest potential interrupters or disruptors of executing on this intentional design within L&D?
That's a great question, Lacey. And I think the greatest disruption to the status quo or to our traditional paradigm is the nature of discovery. I mentioned that the point of work is the starting point. Well, it's actually the starting point for assessment. And I've created a point of work assessment methodology that looks at these 6 categories that you see on the graphic. People and capability is the most common, and that is ground zero for our traditional training needs assessment, where I'm focusing on the capability component of this bucket. performance restrainer attributes that would be potentially involved. I'm looking for what do people need to know in order to do this work. I'm looking based upon competency alignment to create learning objectives. And this is the source information that's then used by the instructional designer to do storyboarding and create the actual content that's going to facilitate knowledge and skills transfer. This is not a bad thing. We still need to do this. My suggestion is there needs to be a new role or a multiple hat scenario for someone in the instructional design role. Now, in my work at Xerox Global Learning Services, we had senior instructional designers and we had learning consultants. So don't get too wrapped up in the role titles that you see here. But those people that fill the performance strategist role are actually the ones that would do the assessment. They get down into the point of work and talk to the operational stakeholders, all the way down to the individuals who actually do the work. And I'm looking at things like environment and culture. What's the level of urgency and risk associated with this job? What's the competitive environment look like? What's the regulatory environment look like? Because there's a lot of things that can impact performance negatively, and many of them have absolutely nothing to do with training. We can't limit our assessments or discovery to just training needs. Workflows and processes speak to what is the work? What are the gaps? What are the root causes that are interfering with workflows and processes? Likewise, content and resources. What are the insights necessary to think critically? What are the assets in terms of information and other resources that I need to have access to in order to manipulate through and to transition through these workflows and processes? Systems and technology speak to the enterprise platforms that we work. It also looks at individual technology, smartphones, tablets, laptops, desktop. It doesn't really matter. Anything that someone has to use, and that goes part of that ubiquitous component that I talked about earlier. Impact and analytics is extremely important, and even more so with the advent of big data. Everyone is looking for, have we made impact? Have we made something that's going to be sustainable? So I'm looking for not just level 3 and level 4 evaluation type data points. I'm looking for asset utilization. Asset utilization that I get out of a learning management system gives me a list of course completions and those who have completed them. What I'm talking about is what are the assets around performance support and performance insights that are being used? Are we engaged? Can we measure engagement across the workforce in these different areas at the point of work? So that's the primary focus there, and actually the point of work assessment informs the training needs assessment, because now I'm looking at, if you recall to the intentional design diagram I showed you a couple minutes ago, we are focusing on taking the point of work and bringing it into the point of entry. And that's where the instructional design role still exists, but now I'm designing point of work assets, performance support, as well as performance insights.
Terrific, Gary. This is outstanding in terms of setting up a real better understanding of where we need to be going. One quick question. I've actually been a performance consultant for the last 20 years. So performance consulting got introduced back in the mid-90s or so. A number of us have been trained and qualified as performance consultants. Now you're introducing performance strategists. What's the difference between a performance strategist as you're defining it now and what a number of us have either been qualified as performance consultants or engaged performance consultants as part of our teams when we have resourced our L&D organizations?
Good point of clarification. I too am a trained performance consultant from years back. I think there's a divergence that takes place because being a performance consultant is not a bad thing. In fact, it's actually an outstanding foundational skill set to have. In fact, when I was hiring people at Xerox, I always asked, do you have a performance consulting background? The difference here is more of what hat are you wearing? I'm wearing a learning and development hat. I am a performance consultant, but I'm looking at performance that is being restrained or limited at the point of work, using those skill sets to do the assessment and ask the questions of the operational stakeholders, what's getting in the way, and the individuals who are actually doing the work. A pure play performance consultant might take a different path and wind up in the Six Sigma organization, focusing on performance improvement from a perspective of process improvement. So there is an overlap, and that's why I said don't get too wrapped up in the titles for these roles. But a performance strategist definitely wears a learning and development hat, and they are focused on what's keeping performance from being maximized and optimized at the point of work.
Great, thanks. Gary, I think maybe you wanted to wrap up this conversation here too with another poll for the audience.
Yes. Plug in your results there. I mean, I actually finished a performance a workshop for a company in Austin, Texas, who have put in place a performance support strategist. So there's yet another role. But that individual is part of learning and development, but their focus is entirely aimed at the operational side of the business, and they're doing the point of work assessment to collaboratively work with the design team to come up with what are the solutions that should be developed. So this is definitely a role that should be in place sooner or later, sooner better than later. Because that's sort of what's facing us. If we're going to accelerate productivity, we have to get to where productivity matters, and that's the point of work. And that's the 97% of the ecosystem that, for the most part, is not being maximized.
Hey, Gary, thanks. Can you see the poll results?
Yes.
Yes.
This, I think, hopefully puts the gauntlet down. We really need to consider how are we going to get to the point of work and how are we going to accelerate productivity, because I don't think we can achieve it. And after 35 years in learning and development from a corporate perspective, I'm convinced that training is not going to be enough. It's good, but it's not enough.
Great. Thanks, Gary. So, Mr. Dave, I heard Gary say loud and clear, we need this performance strategist role to help us as HR leaders focus more on performance and performance outcomes, not just training, to focus on insight curation of content, not just more content. And I also saw pop up on his screen in the upper right-hand corner on the slide before, and a reference in his dialogue to something called performance insights. Can you say a little bit more about how performance insights in a collaborative, insight-driven culture pulled into this whole discussion we're having about how to impact this productivity equation for the challenge we're facing around productivity today?
Sure, Lacey. And so now let's take a little bit of a drill down a bit more and look at some key solution elements that we've been chatting about up to this point. Most of us, and that would include me, probably equate performance support as access to job aids, step-by-step instructions delivered in the workflow. These tools and platforms that do this are mostly tactical. What do I do? Then what's next? And this is what we're calling Curation 1.0. Right? We're all fairly comfortable in this world of support, day in, day out tasks, probably at home. At least if you're better than me, you look at instructions, which are a job aid on how to put something together or maybe even troubleshoot. Hey, those tasks need support, because it's not possible in any way, shape, or form to remember all the steps and requirements for their completion, especially given our ever-changing environment. The job aids are continuously requiring update and must be used in the flow of work. We just can't remember it all, especially those of you that operate in the ERP world, dealing with those massive systems with real-time integrated thousands or 1,000 tasks that are all linked together. How do I do it, and how do I know I've done it right? But now, as Bob mentioned, we're moving up into the knowledge worker arena. We're moving up from the need for Curation 1.0, which we've pretty well got a good handle on, into now needing to work in the world of Curation 2.0. That is the use of our base of bulk information and our multitude of information sources to produce knowledge and wisdom, which we somewhat do today. But now, when we combine that with our everyday experience and our everyday activities, we can apply it all to decision making and problem solving. That allows us to best think critically. When we have these insights, we can now think critically and produce additional, or produce in the first place, actionable performance insights, things that really help us make those good decisions, solve those problems, onboard people better, mentor people in a very evidence-based way, that we can curate and reuse ourselves, as well as making available to the entire organization, or the applicable part of it, our insights, that crowdsourcing, that crowd sharing I mentioned before. So the bottom line is that performance insight assets are much more aligned with strategic scenarios versus tactical performance support situations. We've got to have them both. We need them both. For example, in hands-on, the keyboard tasks like signing up for benefits involve step-by-step situations. And those then need the guidance so that they are done right. But there's also the need using insights to pick the best option that you're going to be entering in the first place in any given situation. This is decision making. It might also be problem solving. Both types of situations are critical in today's flow of work solutions. You can pick your own scenario where there's an interchange of them both. That's just one. But without them, we are, that is both Curation 1.0 and Curation 2.0, we're at the risk of sub-optimization or worse, failure to achieve those outcomes required by our businesses. The ultimate benefit is realizing that by improving that speed to insight and curating those insights, which is not optimized or even possible through the current Curation 1.0 method, is to get to 2.0, where our knowledge workers really need to operate, and they're operating today, but in many cases without what they need.
Great, thanks a lot, Dave. So just at the highest level, performance insights, I translate that to something along the lines of evidence-based wisdom that allows our workforces to make better business decisions faster with evidence. And so to do that, you talked about the fact that we need to move from curating content to curating insights. And to do that, we need this new technology, productivity acceleration technology, or what Bob introduced, that Josh Burson introduced at HR Tech last year, workforce productivity solutions, insight curation engines. Give it the name that you want. Gary, I'm going to pick on you again. As folks are considering reevaluating their technology strategy and supplementing their current LMS, learning experience platforms, et cetera, with this ability to curate insights to amp up productivity, what capabilities of this new workforce productivity insight curation technology do you see as being most critical, most important?
Thanks, Lacey. I think it's important, again, to establish just a little bit of context here. We mentioned this learning continuum that starts with point of entry and goes to point of work. If any of you on the call are formerly part of the Learning and Development Organization, you're probably familiar with the name Bob Mosier and Dr. Conrad Goffredson. They have created the 5 moments of need. The 5 moments of need cover the expanse of this ecosystem. Moments 1 and 2, moment 1 being new learning or first time learning, and moment 2, which is more learning. Perfect example would be level 1 or moment 1 would be taking an Excel course. Moment 2 might be taking a micro learning object on leveraging the use of pivot tables. Those are all training oriented, and that supplies point of entry. When you move to point of work, we shift to moment 3, which is apply. That's the moment where an individual is trying to recall what they got from their moments 1 and 2 at point of entry and actually apply it on the job in the workflow. Moment 4 is solve, where something has gone wrong, where we need to shift to plan B. What do I do now? Something has broken. It's a break fix type situation. Moment 5 is change, which is constant. What's changed in the workflow? What's changed because of a new FDA regulation? We can't afford to pull people off task and run them through training for those moments of change. We need to be at the point of work to solve moments of need within 2 clicks or 10 seconds. Some of the systems that are used actually push that information in the context of the workflow. We can't afford reducing or restraining productivity by going off task to take training. The 2 technologies that support this, we've talked about, performance support or digital performance support, provide the tactical, as Dave described. Step-by-step, task-centric, role-specific. What do I do next? It's very instructional in terms of how it works. Performance insights tend to be more strategic because it enables critical thinking. Without using this technology, we are forwarding bulk content in terms of white papers and documents within the system for someone to read, hopefully to pull that 2% of knowledge and wisdom out of the document that was originally curated at Curation 1.0. The idea here, as Dave said, was to speed insight, to get to the point to where I can critically think and make informed decision making strategically. What's interesting is the fact that we need to do exactly what instructional design talks about doing, which is take those very same assets, those performance support assets and those critical thinking aids for performance insights, and run them in the technology into the point of entry. Again, point of work is being moved into point of entry in terms of the learning experience. I want to embed not only the assets, but the very same technology. So I am holistically treating my ecosystem and I'm optimizing things by using just these 2 technologies. In terms of actual application, I would ask, how many of you are currently engaged in digital transformation initiatives? I know that's a real hot target and could be thrown into that bucket of jargon, but it's happening and it's upon us. Where are you all now in this transition, if you are?
I think we're just waiting for a couple of folks to cast a few more votes here, Gary, so you can take a look at the poll results. Oh, great. Thanks, Kathy. Can you see those, Gary?
Yes, I'm not surprised that no one is completed, because to fully transition to the cloud for digital transformation, it's probably a 3 to 4 year proposition. In progress, yes, you're going to be in progress for quite some time. What's significant to this is these are all technologies. These are premises-based technologies that are being transitioned to the cloud, fully digital, offloading IT for some of the day-to-day activity of keeping the servers up and keeping things alive. Continuity of business is all moving to the cloud, where it's more reliable and more readily available. What I think is most significant is if the technologies that we are going to use to support tactical and strategic moments of need at the point of work, we should be in the cloud with that technology. That's the significance of what we've been talking about here today in accelerating productivity. We're accelerating productivity by moving these systems to the cloud. That's the whole driver behind a digital transformation. We should be there the same way in terms of how we're going to support that and how we're going to optimize that ecosystem.
Great, thanks, Gary. So yeah, those poll results were interesting. I think about 2/3, I think it was like about 66 or 67% hadn't started. About 25% were in process. I think none of you had indicated completed, which yeah, appropriately so. And then again, a handful, or 19 some percent, 11% were planning to begin this year. And that all makes sense with everything we're talking about. There's so much transformation that's needed here, you know, moving from, you know, a content is king driven type culture to, a performance driven insight culture, moving our technology strategies from LMSs to learning experience platforms, and now to workforce productivity solutions. Not that they have to be a rip and replace, but they certainly have to be, an added to. Moving to a performance insights model of thinking so that we can actually get the bump in productivity, not just, focus on, the increase of a new skill. So as I say that out loud, it causes me to say, at least somewhere along the line, for most of us, that means some sort of an additional investment. And so, Dave, as with anything, if somebody's going to invest in process transformation, new technology, or both, right? There has to be a means to measure it so that they can, kind of capture at least an expected ROI, not a hard ROI. Do you have any ideas about where, us as HR leaders, as business leaders, should start as it relates to measurement in this new performance-oriented, learning model in an insight-driven organization with this new addition to technology of insight curation technology?
Sure, Lacey, and then we've got a poll up. If we could have everybody weigh in there, because everything that we've talked about so far all revolves on the job performance, and that is the bottom line of all of our organizations, companies, whether we're trying to show a profit or save lives or create happy veterans, no matter what kind of business we're in, profit making or something that's a little softer, we should all be concerned with optimizing the performance of our employees. So all of that and the results I see have come in, and they're pretty typical of what I've seen. I've been doing and asking these questions all my life on my business.
Hey, Dave,
yeah.
I can't see the results. Can you just say the results for us out loud?
Sure. Not starting, no plans, 40%. Planning to begin in 2019, 12%. In process, 29%. And completed, 19%. Thanks, Lacey, for reminding me to tell everybody what those were. So, and that's pretty typical. And so to get a really solid seat on the table, if we can come to that table with actual, this is the results of our doing our job in talent management and education and on-the-job support, all those, it makes a very strong and proper case, because everything we've talked about so far means very little if we don't achieve the on-the-job performance producing outcomes. And that all means very little if we can't talk about and explain the so what. So this model that we're going to see now puts it all together. That when we know the desired end state, so Gary, if you do a little click there, a couple of them, when we know the desired end state, we can in fact then know where we're going. Because one of my favorite sayings is, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And sort of a little twist on some of the things one of my heroes, Yogi Berra, used to say, the baseball player. So the holistic solutions that Gary and I and Bob have been talking about today and illustrating today make this model true today and will continue into the future, that contain all three elements of interaction that you see on the slide right now. Training, we need training. We need the pieces of it. We know it's instructor-led. That's what my definition of training is. It's instructor-led. It's distance training. It's an employee with a live instructor, right? That's the interaction. It's vital for exploratory quality Q&A and instructions given. You can give feedback. Tough to keep up to date, though. Tough to keep current. Collaboration is any person-to-person interface, right? And there's all kinds of ways that happens with social media, both electronically and person-to-person, on the phone, but that's affected by accuracy and applicability of the information that's exchanged to actually helping you get your job done. Thirdly, and what's becoming most important today in this rapidly changing and integrated workforce, the drum I beat continuously, is curated support in the workflow, enabling people to grab information and insights that we've spoken about previously and immediately apply it to the work at hand. And it's got to be obtained immediately, it's got to be continuously updated, and it's got to be consumable. So when we look at all these pieces and the components that make them up, as we evaluate the observed performance and resulting business and operational outcomes, we can then use that feedback loop to properly establish and put into effect the components and pieces, and most importantly, sustain them in providing the how much is enough in each of those bins, and what resources do we have that we can put in place and sustain in all three areas of the support: training, collaboration, and curated support, to best achieve what we've got to achieve.
Great, thank you, Dave. So, Bob, back to you again. Are there solutions? Are there tools? Is there technology available today that supports the implementation of this performance-oriented learning model, of an insight-driven culture, and of the support of enabling our workers to extract meaning, performance insights to drive up productivity that's waning today?
There is, and I'm going to go off on some of the things that Gary presented as part of the ecosystem. And in fact, a number of you are obviously quite familiar with the learning technologies. There's literally hundreds of learning management systems, learning experience platforms. I don't need to name them. When it comes to the productivity acceleration technologies, both performance support and insight curation, in fact, you may or may not recognize some names, but I'll give them to you so that you kind of know from a performance support standpoint. There's a numerous number of knowledge bases out there that would fall into that category. And then folks like WalkMe, TTS, Epilogue, and Siley, those would all fall into that category of performance support. Well developed and now very accepted technologies in performance support. As we move into that 2.0 realm and start looking at the insight curation engines, there's a very few number of organizations that address that, one of which is Pandexio, the sponsor of this webcast. And in fact, what you see here is the strategy for effectively flipping the entirety of our paradigm on its head. Instead of focusing on the information sources, the content, et cetera, what we're really going to do is look at digitally capturing insights and then sharing, curating, aggregating at the insight level, allowing us to then migrate back to that actionable 2% evidence of the insight and back to the content. So we're not going to lose contact with the content. We're just going to be trying to operate in a performance support, just in time, just enough, just for me, at the insight level. And so if we go on to the next slide, what we've actually seen is a number of significant impacts from operating at this level. So if in fact we can distill the content, the bulk content, to that actionable 2%, put the human being in there, capture their wisdom, experience, and their insights, and then be able to share it and aggregate it at that level, what we actually see is more productive, higher value collaboration. Big impact on collaboration. You probably are using a number of collaboration tools already, be it Microsoft Teams or Yammer or Slack or any of those. This makes that even more impactful. Better meetings, better decisions, innovate faster, and then access the insights in seconds, the actionable 2% in a few seconds, and then if you need to go to the bulk content, you have it there to support any of that critical thinking or decision making that we spoke to at the beginning. And then finally, being able to recognize, reward, retain those individuals. We call them subject matter experts, but who are the subject matter experts these days? Literally everybody. If we're all knowledge workers, we all have expertise. We all have to be able to be recognized for that expertise and be able to be rewarded for that expertise. That's the future of the workforce. So I'll leave it at that right now. Turn it back over to Lacey for closing comments.
Great, well, that was fun. Thank you, Bob and Gary and Dave, for sharing perceptions and wisdom, experiences, know-how, and data that makes clear the criticality of leveraging new human capital tools, namely these insight curation platforms and processes like in the flow of work to remove this productivity cap on today's workforces. As the digital transformation takes over, organizations everywhere, it seems, seek to improve the productivity and the performance of each and every single one of our employees, regardless of tenure or level. So you three have, really shared some compelling stories and data about how these new human capital management tools and processes can be counted on by leading organizations. Thank you for introducing us to Josh's system of productivity in today's evolving human capital technology roadmap and strategies, and calling out the associated call to action for other HR and business leaders in removing the productivity cap. So through conversation today, we attempted to remind you, show you, introduce you to new processes, and get you thinking about what you need to do to move into the productivity plateau and removing it. So that concludes our comments. Kathy, I know we're right at the top of the hour. I don't know if folks that are still hanging on, if there's time for questions. If not, we can certainly take them post-webcast.
Well, thank you, Lacey. Yes, we are out of time, and if anyone does have any questions, you can submit them now while I'm just doing the closing remarks, and those will be sent off to Pandexio. So I want to thank all of our presenters today for a wonderful webcast, and I want to thank the audience for joining us today. If you would like to view this webcast again, the archive recording and slides will be available on hr.com for up to 7 days for the free members and without restrictions for those with the certification membership. The webcast credits will show up in your hr.com account within 2 business days. We will also send you an email with the credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment and fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.